All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. We are going to give it another 60 to 90 seconds. Let people filter in here and join us. I think Tyler and I are probably just going to BS in the interim. So, Tyler, have you read anything interesting in like restaurant news wise recently?
Um, yeah, I've been, you can't help but watch what's happening in casual dining, considering that's my vertical. It's been really interesting, of course, watching Chili's growth and the comeback story there in the past 3 years. But some of their marketing is really interesting to me because they're very much known for the value play and being, cost effective for families. But they also can dabble in kind of those premium items,
Right.
which is not talked about as much. But I think what's interesting is some of their menu offerings, they're going specifically directly at QSR brands.
Yeah.
With like the big QP
The
and
whole three for me is
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
which is really interesting. I don't remember that ever happening 7, 8 years ago when I was last in casual dining. So that's an
Yeah.
interesting turn of events.
Yeah, I'm curious for your take on this because the way I've been thinking about it is like it's really the last 24-month kind of phenomenon where like inflation has caused QSR to raise their prices
Yeah.
to the point like there's this like convergence happening between QSR, fast casual, and casual dining, and it really honestly didn't. It took me until this most recent like inflation cycle for me to understand casual dining's value prop of, oh, if QSR is going to be the same price as my fast casual meal, I might as well go for the fast casual, which probably has better quality ingredients. And then on the flip side, it's like casual dining and again, lines blurring, pricing, and casual
Hmm.
dining, I guess, is leaning harder on experience and being like, hey, we might be a little bit more or we might be comparably priced, but the experience is going to be better, the quality is going to be better, the experience is going to be better. And that's sort of how I've been thinking about it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm curious for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I remember a couple of years ago when I was at Focus Brands, I was building out. We're doing a point of sale proof of concept, and at that time I was director of IT, so I was like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I was part doer, part like looking ahead. But in this case, like team didn't have bandwidth. I'll raise my hand. I'll build out the proof of concept location. So
Yeah.
building out these menus, and I'm like entering prices, and I'm entering 3PD prices, and then like I looked at them. I remember pausing in the middle of entering pricing and going like, that sure is an $18 salad, isn't it?
Yeah.
And like that's when it hit me of like, oh, at some point in the past 24, 36 months, like it was like a ships in the night thing where fast casual and QSR became as expensive as casual dining.
Yeah.
And then yeah, now you're kind of in head to head competition, which is not something that I foresaw happening when I last was in casual dining.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks to those of you who joined us while Tyler and I were just like shooting the shit a little bit, but appreciate you being here. By way of introduction, we'll get the formal program started now. I'm Abhinav Kapoor, co-founder and CEO of Bicky. We are a customer data platform for restaurants. We basically collect all of your data in store, off premise, loyalty, non-loyalty, pull it all together, map the entire customer journey. And then our goal is to help brands understand that when they pull a lever to grow the business on the marketing side, on the menu side, on the ops side, instead of just looking at the loyalty program or instead of just looking at top line sales, how do we help you understand the impact of those decisions on traffic, frequency, retention, lifetime value, the things that ultimately drive top line sales in the first place. Walk-ons, we're proud to say, is one of our partners, and it's my pleasure to introduce Tyler Schack, VP of Technology at Walk-ons. Tyler, I would love to pass the mic over to you. Walk people through your background, how you got started in the restaurant
Hmm.
industry, how you ended up at Walk-ons, and we'll take the conversation from there.
Sure. Yeah, Tyler Shack. I come from a restaurant family, 3 generations restaurant owners and operators. I think I was always destined to do something in the restaurant space when I grew up. My first shift in a restaurant, I was 12 years old. I was washing dishes in my uncle's sports bar.
Forced labor.
That Yeah, free labor.
Yeah.
At that shift, my grandma was managing the kitchen, my mom was running the floor, and my sister was serving.
Wow.
And so since that day, I've effectively been in restaurants my entire life, and eventually went from working in my uncle's sports bar to working for Buffalo Wild Wings. Started out as a cashier there, worked as a server, did some training, did some restaurant openings, became a restaurant manager. And then I eventually made the leap from restaurant manager to Buffalo Wild Wings restaurant technology team, despite having no IT background whatsoever.
Yeah.
And we've just kind of kept snowballing and growing until we've gotten here with walk-ons, and I've been now 18 months in role with walk-ons.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's funny that you mentioned that being your first year, because before we went live, you told me your sister also works at
Yeah.
Inspire. So it's not just you; it's the whole family is continuing this legacy of working in the restaurant business, basically.
Yeah, and we also she worked at Buffalo Wild Wings corporate as well.
Oh wow.
So
Okay.
we overlapped there. I
Yeah.
got to give her credit. She never took advantage of the fact that I was in the IT department. Like she never called in the favor. She always followed the process. She always
Yeah.
put in the ticket. Uh, Unless she was like super frustrated, and she'd be like, "Can you fix my shit?" And then I
Yeah.
would,
And then you
fine,
had
I'll
to
pull it.
swoop
I'll
in.
pull it.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, fantastic story, fantastic introduction. Tell us a little bit about Walk-Ons, where the brand is based, how big you are, your positioning in the market,
Yep.
and a little bit about your role there.
Yeah, so Walk-Ons was founded in 2003. Uh, Walk-Ons is really a true underdog story. Our founder Brandon Landry was a walk-on the LSU basketball team. That's where the name comes from. He dreamed up the idea that became walk-ons on a flight home from Kentucky, and he drew out walk-ons on the back of a beverage napkin on a flight. And on that napkin was everything that walk-ons would become, minus the kitchen. He was very much about the fun side of it, but
Yeah,
less the practical side of it. And over the last 23 years and change, he grew, the brand grew. We started franchising not until 2016, and since then we've grown to 78 locations, primarily in like SEC country in the Southeast,
yeah,
and 26 franchisees.
amazing, amazing. And when you think about that transition, because I think your journey went from family restaurant to Buffalo Wild Wings, so called enterprise casual dining, and then you had a stint over at Focus or Go To as it's called now, so call it enterprise QSR, and then you find your way to emerging growth casual dining. Can you talk through what that transition was like?
Mhm.
What surprised you? What sort of realizations or come to Jesus moments did you have when you went from brands with just massive, massive scale to again an emerging growth brand that's sub 100 units right now?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. So my first exposure to restaurant technologies was Buffalo Wild Wings. That time we were publicly traded. We were 1,200 restaurants. 600 of those were corporate owned, and then 600 were franchised. And so when you have that, you have a little bit more control than you do in a fully franchised environment, which is what I found myself in when I transitioned to Focus Brands or Go To Food. I went from 50% corporate to 99% franchise.
Franchise, yeah,
And when you go from a really big organization to one that's a little bit smaller, what you find is you don't have as much specialization. So, like when I was at Buffalo Wild Wings, I was just buttons on screen guy. That's what I did. I put buttons on screen, I put pricing in, I fixed tickets. That was my job. And then I got to Focus Brands and became an administrator for Cinnabon right out of the gate. And I remember the first time I had like an issue with the network equipment or payments, and I was like, who do I go to help with this? And they're like, no, that's you.
you.
You're the guy that fixes this.
Yeah, yeah,
And so you had to adjust to being that heavily franchised and having more like general skill set than a super specialized skill set.
yeah,
And then, as I went from admin to manager there and a manager of people, I had to adjust to delegating and all of that type of thing. But then going from a Focus Brands to a walk-ons, so one, I'm going from fast casual and QSR back to casual dining. There's an adjustment there.
yeah,
But going from a Focus where we were 7 brands, shared service, I think the team I had when I left was 12-ish people, plus a nearshore team that was supplementing us, to coming to walk-ons where it was me and a team of 3 people.
yeah,
It was kind of the same type of culture shock that I had going from Buffalo Wild Wings to Focus, in terms of like, this time it expanded to traditional IT as well. So like, hey, I'm having this problem with email. Who do I go to? You go to
yeah,
you.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah, I
but
remember this. When we were trying to email you guys, and we're like, try this domain instead, because I haven't been
yeah,
getting your emails on the other.
we
Yeah,
we pivoted. We got blocked by
yeah,
Google for a little bit. That was a
yeah,
fun one. I think I was like maybe 3 months on the job at that point. Like, welcome
yeah,
to
yeah,
welcome to enterprise IT.
yeah. Right, right.
But I think the biggest adjustment that I've had since I've gone back to casual dining here, and from a really big concept to one that's sub 100 restaurants, is identifying that the opportunity cost is a little bit higher. I don't have the
Mm,
same resources that I had at a Focus. I don't have the same budget I had at Focus. And so like when we decide to go all in on a project, like we have to be really confident that it is the right way to spend our time and resources, because there's this big backlog of other things that we can do. And if we do something that doesn't have the ROI or it's a flop, like we got to kind of dig ourselves out of that hole. So we have to really do our due diligence before we say, yeah, let's go.
yeah. Were there any early bets that you took? I guess in those, you're only 18 months into your tenure, and I'm sure you've sort of been like molding the department in your own image. But like, I guess what were some of those early, I won't say, well, yeah, riskier bets where again, like you're coming in and maybe a sub 100 unit brand
Hmm.
didn't have these kinds of capabilities before, or didn't feel like they had the resources to take on some of the things that you want to do. Maybe talk us through some of those early bets. Yeah.
Yeah, so the first thing that I did, came in, I reviewed my budget, and I walked into our CEO's office and said, I need double this. If we're
How'd that
gonna,
go?
it didn't go well for me.
Yeah,
I can throw you a few bucks, but we're not doubling that.
yeah, yeah,
And that's kind of the thing that I realized early on, was that there was a lot of things that I was accustomed to from working for big brands that we just didn't have as a smaller brand. And
yeah,
it wasn't because it was, any kind of maliciousness or any kind of like incompetence or anything like that. It's just you don't know what you don't know when you're trying to scale a brand. Versus someone like me coming from 7 brands, 3,000 restaurants, before that 1,200 restaurants, like, oh, I know where we need to go and I know what things we need to do along the way to get there. But in terms of like the early big bet that I made, is I kind of walked in and it was online ordering and loyalty, which is really really fundamental. We had platforms in place for those capabilities. It wasn't quite doing what we needed it to do
yeah.
for where we were in our growth trajectory and where we were hoping to go. And so we had to kind of do that comprehensive RFP and really do our due diligence and pick platforms that we knew were stable and scalable. And so we wound up partnering with Patronics and Olo, which they might not be, they're great platforms, but it's very safe. It's very safe.
Yeah.
It's not the sexiest thing in the world, but when you're a
But
brand
they
that's
work.
78, yeah, it works. Like we're
Yeah.
78 units right now, and we had incidents where like guests would go to our website, they would click order online, they would click their favorite restaurant, and then there just wouldn't be a menu. And there's a lot of competition out in the marketplace, and they're going to go somewhere else, and you might not get another crack at their business for some time, if ever. And so I had
Yeah.
to go and say, we're spending a lot of money right now, and I know we just rolled these solutions out within the past couple of years, but we got to do it again. And so this was the third online ordering and loyalty change in 18 months for walk-ons, which was a very unpopular thing to do. And
Yeah.
I had to get up in front of franchisees and say like, hey, I know you've been through this, I know your guests have been through it, but this is what we need to do to grow the business. And
To get it right.
it's been an incredible success since we launched.
Yeah. That's awesome. And then I guess like that to that end, when you talk about ROI, when you talk about trade offs, it felt like that one is maybe like a more obvious one in the sense that
Hmm.
like totally there is the balance of trying to win over internal support as well as franchisee support, but the current platforms just weren't fitting the bill and weren't doing the job.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you felt like I want to invest in this and it's a trade-off with something else that we might want to do, or like any of those, maybe a tougher call on the technology side?
Yeah. Anytime you're pitching something that is not guest facing, that's not sexy, that doesn't like pop a headline, it's always a little bit of an uphill battle. So like the thing that I'm kind of beating the drum on right now is around comprehensive managed networks. We're talking about firewalls and access points and managed switches and internet, cellular backup, that type of stuff. And that's one of those things that is often overlooked, but is the backbone of everything that we're trying to do, both from an in restaurant and above store perspective. Because, if your network is flimsy and is constantly going offline, those orders, Olo's great, but it's only as good as the orders it can submit to the restaurant. If they're constantly
Right.
offline, we're going to have that bad guest experience. Then the in restaurant thing, TV over IP, VoIP, your guest Wi-Fi. We have fantasy football coming up right around the corner, so like our guest Wi-Fi is going to begin to work out. So if you don't have a resilient network that can stand up to the demands of the business, everything else is kind of moot.
Yeah.
but also no one wants to hear me come up to them and say, "Hey, could you spend $30,000 to refresh your network?"
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm working towards a proof of concept right now with a solution, and then I'm going to go on the
Nice.
sales campaign to try to get people to invest.
Nice. I love it. And I guess shifting gears into sort of like positioning and casual dining now, I think we were talking about this at the top, but you had said that, hey, last time I was in casual dining, I didn't sort of realize that the lines were starting to blur and
Hmm.
sort of casual competes with fast casual competes with QSR in this current environment, just given where pricing is and probably also kind of where portion size and quality is a little bit. Maybe more so fast casual versus casual on the quality side. But can you talk about like the value prop for casual? We'll say we'll go into walk on specifically, but if you step back and you talk about the value prop for casual dining in the current landscape,
Yep.
how do you think about that? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So I think value is an interesting one. And coming back to casual dining after 7 years, I do feel like it changed over that time. And so I think now there's two value equations, maybe more, probably more. And I think that one value equation is that off-prem 3PD side. And that's where those lines are blurred the most because we're shoulder to shoulder with fast casual and QSR restaurants when people go to DoorDash. And so I think regardless of what segment you're in, that it's all about price, accuracy, quality, and speed for a 3PD. And so when you kind of extrapolate that out, I don't think that in casual dining anymore that you can just focus on the competitors within your vertical. I think now you
Mm,
have to be aware of all activity that's happening in your market because some of these QSR and fast casual brands, they specialize in one thing. Maybe it's chicken tenders and they do chicken tenders really, really well. So
yeah,
can I, as a casual dining concept, knowing that I'm going to be in that lineup, be three, four, $5 more expensive than a specialty QSR? I don't think you can anymore. And so then now you need to have a pricing strategy, and your pricing strategy has to be nimble enough to adjust to those market conditions. And then that's where it really gets into my world of technology because I need to have a tech stack that can allow us to implement that pricing strategy. I need it to be able to do it in a way that's scalable. I need that to not to disrupt or ruin the team member experience in terms of ringing in
yeah,
the order. Need to not ruin the guest experience ordering from our websites. And then I also needed to give me good data on the back end and also deplete inventory correctly. So
you're right.
that's what my job is.
Wow.
And I'm trying to thread that needle on the value side and pricing strategy side. But then on the dine-in equation is completely different because we just have so much more time with the guest for a dining experience in casual dining than you do in
Yeah,
fast casual QSR. Like walk the line bowl concept, like there might be like 2 minutes of team member guest interaction. In my side, 45 minutes on average. And then if it's a big game,
wow.
like we just had the NBA finals, guests are going to be in our restaurant for 2.5 hours, 3 hours, which is a mixed blessing kind of, because it's a lot more time for us to recover if something goes wrong, but it's also a lot more time for something to go wrong. And so everything else around the steps of service and the guest experience in restaurant weighs in so heavily on that value proposition, from the music, the sports packaging, the guest Wi-Fi, the wait experience. Like it's two different equations that we have to deal with, and you have to be able to implement a pricing strategy that lets you win in
Yeah.
both spaces.
Yeah, and this is a good pause for housekeeping. Alan, I saw you ask a question. Thank you so much for asking. We're gonna get through another probably 20 to maybe 30 minutes of conversation, and then we'll flip over to questions. So, Alan, just sit tight, and we'll be sure to circle back to your question there. And then on the in-store experience side, when you think about that double-edged sword, um, obviously the menu plays a huge role in that,
Hmm.
and like the food's got to be good and the service has got, like, I just feel like when people think about value they always think about price,
Yeah.
and I think increasingly what we're seeing is like there's price is like the easiest thing to measure because it's the one thing that everybody can compare on at a very high level. But to your point, like, there's ambiance, there's experience, there's food, there's hospitality, there's speed of service. And so
Hmm.
talk to us a little bit about, I think your guys' menu is a little unique.
Yeah.
Obviously there are other sports bar concepts out there. There are other like maybe polished casual concepts out there, but talk a little bit about the menu and the role that plays in
Yeah.
walk on specifically, because my sense is that it is a little probably different or off the beaten path from what a guest is used to when they come to a comparable concept in another part of the country.
Yeah, so I think there's probably food is definitely one of our big differentiators. There's two more that I'll touch on in a second, but to talk about food, like I still think to this day in casual dining, there's still a lot of freezer to fryer that happens. We are a scratch kitchen, which that in and of itself is a little bit unique in the sports bar concept. So right out of the gate, you're going to get an elevated culinary experience when you come to a walk-ons. But the second piece goes back to our roots, and we're a brand that was founded in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and so that influence can kind of be felt throughout the entire menu. So you find menu items and flavors and textures that you're not used to getting in a sports bar concept, and that's where our culinary experience starts to set us apart a little bit. Looking at the other two pieces that kind of differentiate walk-ons, that game day experience that we kind of touched on a minute ago, that's kind of huge for us, and that's actually what led me to taking this job. After 7 years of being out of casual dining, I went to a walk-ons during the interview process, and I happened to go in during the Georgia Texas football game in the fall of 2023, and the energy inside of a sports bar when there's a big game happening is kind of unmatched. Like
Yeah.
there's other casual dining concepts that can they can do really good food, but they can't match that game day experience. And then the last thing is kind of we're a family friendly sports bar. So like when I think back to my uncle's sports bar when I was a kid, if you walked in on a football Sunday and looked around, like I was the only child that you saw in that sports bar, and for good reason. Like I saw and heard things as a 10-year-old that most parents don't want a 10-year-old to see or hear. And that's something that you just don't have to worry about at a walk-ons. Like you're never gonna have that awkward silence on the drive home as you think about like, okay, how do I explain this to my son or daughter?
Yeah.
And when you combine those three things, I think it creates a pretty solid recipe for us.
Yeah, amazing. And I think you've done a good job of setting the stage of sort of like walk-on's uniqueness from a service standpoint, from an ambiance standpoint, and from a culinary standpoint. Can you walk us through where walk-ons was at when you joined?
Yeah.
I think it was a precarious time for casual dining. It still kind of feels like a precarious time for casual dining. So maybe walk us through where the business was at the time that you joined. And because the theme of this is how do you build a resilient casual dining brand? And so
Hmm.
what I'm looking for is like when you joined, what's been the sort of trajectory of the business?
Yeah.
When you joined, what are the things that you guys have been investing in that have given validation that you're on the right path here? And then we'll use that to transition to like setting the stage for the future, essentially. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the business was in a really interesting time because we were still in kind of like that table stakes phase in terms of what we wanted to be able to offer our guests. I touched on online ordering and loyalty earlier. We were still very much in our infancy there. We When I started, we didn't have full adoption of 3PD. Like we didn't have a lot of restaurants offering our menu on the platform. So we were in the middle of trying to convince our franchisees of what the ROI of being on the marketplaces was. So there was a lot of table stakes work that was happening, a lot of conversations taking place there. But then, from a brand perspective, we were also in this situation of I don't want to say an identity crisis because that's too strong, but we were having conversations about who we are, who we want to be, and who our core guests were, and we
Yeah.
didn't really have an answer for that at the time, and so we did a brand study, which our partners were fantastic, and they made it very clear through focus groups and surveys and things like, yeah, walk-ons is a sports bar. That's how your guests see you. So you're a sports bar, and your core guests should be these people. And that was great, and that kind of gave us a line in the sand. Let's pivot and go. But then we still that was great, but it still didn't give us the full picture of our current landscape and our current guests. We really didn't have a sense for frequency or menu preferences or menu behavior beyond like the usual stuff you get. This is my P mix. This is my P mix amongst loyalty guests, but loyalty guests make up that much of the customer base. And that's
Yeah.
where we decided like we have to get a CDP to be able to give color to that gigantic slice of the pie that we just don't have visibility to, and that's how we came to onboard with Vicky.
Yeah, that's awesome. And when you think about like the series of, so there's this core question of like who is the guest?
Hmm.
I think that maybe triggered the discovery process on your side. Um, what were some of the other questions associated with who is our guest that you felt like were floating around internally? I think the thing that I always gravitate towards when I talk with our partners is, you know, we're making a lot of assumptions. We have a lot of hunches. We don't really know. So, but all of those hunches start with some root questions about the guests, about the menu, about their frequency. So, what were some of the questions that were floating around internally?
Definitely the breakdown, male versus female. I think there's this perception stereotype of a sports bar. Like you think it's dudes, drinking beer.
Yeah,
Well, when we got access to the data, like one of the surprising things that we saw right away is that we as a brand actually skew female. So whereas we thought it was going to be, 60-40 male to female, it was
yeah,
actually the reverse. So we actually
interesting.
skewed female which was kind of wild. And then it was around frequency. Like we have an idea of how frequently our guests are coming into our restaurant, but we weren't sure. And the data that we had was from the brand study, and we had a number. That number was ultimately based off of a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand focus groups and survey responses. But now we were able to get access to a platform that had several hundred thousand
Yeah,
records and be able to match against that and really definitively say, like, yeah, a guest that is a part of our loyalty program is coming X times per year versus someone who's not, is only coming Y. And so what was the other interesting piece about that was that the numbers in Bicky were actually different than what our loyalty platform was telling us around frequency,
interesting.
specifically frequency around loyalty guests. And it came down to the fact that Bicky's going off of credit card data in many cases, or whatever piece of PII that someone's giving us. And so we were able to see when a loyalty guest came into our restaurant but didn't sign into their loyalty program or didn't attach it to their check.
Mm,
And then that opens up some really interesting questions of, like, why is that? Is our program effective? Are the team members not offering it? Or is it because we've changed 3 times in 18 months, and maybe
right.
they're thinking, like, my points are just going to vanish if I invest any time or money into it?
Right, right. Yeah, that's a good call out, and I think that like it sounds like as we think about setting the stage for the future of the brand, a lot of it comes down to just rooting some of these decisions more in the data, right? I think it's
Yeah.
just like a better understanding the guests and rooting some of these decisions more in the data. Is that a
Well,
fair way to think about it?
yeah, I think it is. And I think, one of the things that we've unlocked now is, and these are tactics that are very common amongst the large brands. Getting hyper personal, hyper local with our offerings and the timing of those offers, and being able to have that entire data set of customers that we can potentially market to. We're now able to do marketing tactics that brands 10 times our size are. And so we can get the right offer to the right guest at the right time. Maybe that hero image as part of the email is an item that they've ordered repeatedly,
Right,
or maybe we know that this particular group of users, they don't actually need a discount to come into the restaurant. We just need to remind them that we exist, and we're going to send it on this cadence and attract that specific guest. And that was something that we just couldn't do before, and now that we can really build these really cool customer journeys and really measure the effectiveness of our campaigns and attribute it specifically to one segment, which is really cool.
yeah. So if you're armed with this insight, better insight around frequency, better insight around maybe core demographics of the guests,
Hmm.
what are some of the things that start to change internally at the business? From a maybe from a marketing or from a menu standpoint. I think marketing you just
Yeah.
talked about a little bit, but maybe tying those back to the walk-ons as differentiators. Would love to understand how you accentuate those differentiators or lean harder into those differentiators now that you have some data basically to
Yeah.
support those decisions.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we see now, and from a marketing perspective, now that we have visibility into the habits of men versus women versus different age groups, different incomes, different is get hyper local with the marketing that we're putting out into the field, and maybe personalize or customize those offerings based off of each market in our restaurant. So if we go over to a restaurant in Louisiana, maybe the in restaurant highlights our bonus wings, draft beer, and and our waffle fries, but maybe outside of Louisiana, maybe it's our lemon butter chicken and our strawberry lemon drop martini. Maybe those are the items that guests are ordering most frequently. Maybe those items resonate with females, or maybe they resonate with the sports enthusiasts. And now we can tailor our response to the guests that are actually showing up in the restaurant versus being, kind of more general based off of our high level 10,000 foot data. And then
Yeah.
operationally, we can tailor the operations experience too, because we have our training materials and we have our kind of flagship items that we love. But if we know that, say, the Cajun ribeye has this incredibly high retention rate with first time guests, when the first time guest comes through the door, maybe we're offering that instead of maybe our cheeseburger sliders that we would have offered previously. And so now it kind of gives us the opportunity to be a little bit um, more customized and and tailor our operations and marketing to the guests that are actually coming to the door versus our hypothesis we had before.
Yeah. No, I love this because you are tying in, we set this admittedly nebulous title of how to build a resilient casual dining brand. But we did tie in a little bit your perspective on the value prop for casual dining and the value prop for walk-on specifically. And I think you're doing a great job of just talking about how we just have data to basically reinforce those value props,
Hmm.
right? Like
Yeah.
just understanding the difference between who our guest is in Louisiana versus as we grow and we expand outside Louisiana, what's different about that guest? And then how do we take that down to the operational level, to the service model level, and actually understand that, hey, if we have 45 minutes with these people, what are the things that we can lean on internally and should be training our people to reinforce to ensure that they have a great experience and that they want to come back, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's so good holistically. But yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
I think that what we're doing now is that since we've onboarded a CDP and our access to data, we're asking better questions than we would have asked before. So
yeah,
now we're looking at, like, okay, what is the why behind this, and what is the who, and then what are, like, the characteristics of, say, a menu item that's performing really well? Why is it performing really well in this market? And then you can start to develop hypotheses, and then develop an action plan based off of that, and go out and test that, and see what the results are. Versus, before, maybe if we're doing an LTO, we're doing an LTO because you're supposed to do an LTO. Versus now we can go, like, hey, this is what our core guest is. This is who our core guest is. This is what they order. Now, what can we do in this space to develop something that's going to really resonate with that guest and get them coming back more frequently or spending more money?
yeah. I think you said something about this. You said this in one of our prep calls where where you were talking about the intentionality of certain decisions. Can you walk us through kind of like that again? How your perspective has shifted on LTOs in general when you think about the intentionality of the LTO or what purpose the LTO serves for
Yeah.
walk-ons?
So
Yeah,
yeah. So first things first, I think I owe every marketing peer that I've had an apology, because I've had historically a very narrow view of what a successful LTO is. Like, product mix, sales, and was traffic up when we ran this LTO. And then when it ran its course, if it didn't drive sales, like, I was kind of over it, didn't care about it, didn't think about it again. Well, then once I got access to Bicky, I was looking at this report. You guys have this menu item retention report that kind of shows the likelihood a guest is going to come back for a second visit based on what they ordered on their first time in the restaurant. And I was, like, scrolling through, and I was looking at our flagship items, and some items were kind of average, and some were a little bit above, some were a little bit below, and then there was a number that just jumped off the page, and it was this LTO we ran last summer, and it did fine. Like, it didn't, set the world on fire from a sales perspective, but it wasn't a flop. It came, it went, it ran its course, didn't think about it again. And then I see this number, and what it told us was that if a guest was new to walk-ons when that LTO was running and they ordered that item, they were 30%, 30% likely to come back for a second visit, or likely to come back for a
wow.
second visit, than if they would have ordered any other item on the screen. And, like, that hit me like a bolt of lightning as soon as I saw it, because I was like, oh, hold on a second. And the first thing that I thought in seeing that was, number one, I need to be more patient, because, like, this result and this data point and this insight didn't present itself for 6 months, 12 months after the LTO ran.
Yeah,
And then the second thing is that
yeah,
I had to shift my thoughts on what a successful LTO or menu innovation would look like, because maybe, and what is the intention of an LTO? Because maybe it does average in sales, but it performed incredibly well with your core guest. And then that ultimately 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, got an extra visit. Or maybe the goal of an LTO or a menu item was to get lapsed guests back. And I had never had that frame of mind. I always thought it was be gangbusters in sales or get lost. And now I'm sitting here going like, yeah, we can do something and it can just be okay from a sales perspective, but you got to play the long game because it might end up being a winner long term.
Yeah, I want to stay on this thread because when you think about maybe a little more tactically, if you think about a recent LTO and being more intentional with it, and whether the purpose is new guest acquisition or lapsed guest kind of reactivation, can you walk us through like a specific example of something that did that? You mentioned a little bit with this menu item, but I'm curious how when you have the LTO, when it makes that impact, maybe take it to like, what's the next step after that? Okay, we got we reactivated that lapse gas. What's the next step after that from a further menu development or innovation standpoint, or even from a service standpoint?
Yeah. So in that case, with that particular LTO, we started to ask a series of questions of like, okay, what was it? What was the characteristics of this product? So in this case, um, it was something called a triple play sampler, and what it had was three sliders on it. One, our cheeseburger slider, which is one of our kind of flagship core items. It had a barbecue pork slider, and it had a fried chicken buffalo slider. And so like immediately it's kind of deconstructing that and identifying what the core characteristics of it was. So in this case, it was like a variety of textures, a variety of flavors, and going back to like how Walk-Ons differentiates ourselves, and part of it being that kind of culinary experience. I think what an item like that does, and the variety that was on the plate, is it showed a first time guest like, yeah, okay, these guys, this feels a little bit different, or this isn't something I'm used to getting, or they do a lot. I wonder what else is good on the menu. So I think that in some respects it generated curiosity, which then led to guests coming back for a second time. But then now it's okay. Now how do we replicate this? So we've developed a hypothesis. We've identified the characteristics. We develop a hypothesis based on the characteristics of the menu item and who ordered it. And then it's how can we replicate that? How do we either tap into existing SKUs and ingredients in our restaurant and combine them in new ways to replicate this type of an experience, or how do we tap into current trends in a way that feels like it would have a similar look and feel? And so like part of me, when I looked at that, it was like variety. We have a gap on our menu when it comes to shareables, and so maybe the concept of a sampler is something that we should explore, or maybe it's just a sports bar and guests love a slider. Incidentally, we had a new menu launch back in March, and we had a new product on there called it's just a ribeye slider. It's incredible, and it was an instant hit, right from day one, instant hit. So maybe guests just love sliders. So maybe we do a little bit more in that space.
Yeah,
and now
that's
I'm
awesome.
speaking. Now I'm
And
speaking for our head of
yeah,
culinary,
go
and
ahead.
he's gonna get mad at me. He's gonna get because now I'm pitching my personal passion projects right now.
Yeah.
Uh,
Don't worry. We can censor this when we send this version of the recording to him. That's fine. Yeah, we can just cut out a 30 or 60 seconds here. Were there other things that you found with that related to the core menu that I think surprised you? Because one of the things I think about is like, I think you're doing a great job of calling out maybe being intentional with LTOs, which
mhm.
are semi-regular occurrences, right? At the end of the day, I think what a lot of casual dining brands have, this is my opinion more so than a fact, but there's always like there's a staple set of items, the top 5, the top 7, the top 10 things that everybody intuitively feels is like the thing that people come to us for. And then LTOs are a great way to maintain consistent engagement with the guest, whether new guests or repeat guests on an ongoing basis. Did you learn anything about, I won't say unpopular, but something that maybe changed your perspective on stuff around the core menu specifically, and then caused you to reposition that core menu item? Because I think that's the thing where a lot of casual dining brands are flying blind. And we think about this concept of being resilient, right?
Yep.
It is doing what you're doing, which is just like using data to basically update your culinary innovation to be consistently relevant to the guest. But for those who aren't necessarily doing as many LTOs, what do they do when it comes to the core menu? And how does the data inform kind of how you treat the core menu?
Yeah, so the core menu was interesting. So we had questions about how Louisiana and the Louisiana influence would play outside of our core market, which is that kind of Louisiana territory. That was very historically inclined there, the Louisiana territory. We so what we
Is that
found is
like all
that
the purchase states, all the states that
yeah,
were in the
yeah.
purchase,
We're
basically?
not in
Yeah,
all of those quite yet. It's
yeah,
coming soon, I
yeah,
suppose. But what we found is that those Louisiana flavors and that Louisiana influence plays well outside of Louisiana, and I think that part of it is, again, it's kind of unique. You don't really see those flavors or those menu items in a sports bar, let alone made from scratch. And so that was one thing that we noticed with the core menu that was really encouraging. So like when we started looking at what things we want to keep versus cut, we didn't end up needing to pivot away from Louisiana, and we thought as we start to go national, maybe we have to. But then the other thing from a core menu perspective that I found really surprising is that we launched a refreshed menu on March 10th, and there was some subtractions, some additions. One of the things that we subtracted was it was like a grilled chicken dish. It was pretty popular, but it was kind of on the fence. We had a few other things on the menu that kind of gave a similar feel or a similar culinary experience, but we removed it. But people were really kind of passionate about it, and they liked it a lot. And so, like, we were curious where these guests were going to go. Like, what were they going to transition to from this item? And we had our hypothesis. We had this lemon butter chicken product. It's really good. It's kind of the same thing, healthy skewing product. And then an interesting thing developed, and it was like first two options: healthy halo, very fresh, clean ingredients. The third most transitioned item after that menu launch was our blackened chicken Alfredo, which that raised such interesting questions internally because, like, you go from super healthy and fresh to decadent, indulgent, dense. And, like, is it just the blackened chicken because both products had blackened chicken, or was it one of those situations where the guests came in and were like, "My favorite item's gone. Fuck it. I'm going all in on calories." And so that's something really interesting to play with, because maybe now we can lean into that in some way, shape, or form in the future.
yeah. Was there a tangible impact on traffic, frequency, anything like that when you went through this addition deletion process? I
Yeah.
guess what early results have you seen? I guess it's only been 3 months, I know, since you
So
relaunched, made
that
some of these changes.
that was one of those questions, and like you start to get the kind of ambiguous question of like, is the new menu successful?
Yeah,
And going back to one of my earlier points about uh, you needing time for things to kind of play out, and with our frequency being, our most engaged guests coming 3-4 times a year, you're not going to really feel the full impact of our menu change for, call it, 6 months or maybe
right.
more. Um, but we did see some interesting early trends, and what we saw was, I think it was maybe 6 or 8 weeks into the launch, we saw our traffic was down. Our traffic was down broadly to start the year, but then coinciding with the launch of the new menu, we saw this significant jump in returning lapsed guests to our restaurant.
Nice,
And like
nice.
that could be coincidence, right? It was over March Madness, but I did kind of the year over year normalizing for the tournament, and then I kind of went one level deeper and went, oh, new menu items or retooled items were just littered throughout these guests' orders. And
Yeah,
so, I think that one of the things that it did was it told us, yeah, this new menu is at minimum generating curiosity amongst our guests, and it's bringing them back in the restaurant to try them. Now, the key is once they're in the restaurant, can we execute operationally and deliver the culinary experience, the guest experience, to get them coming back more often?
yeah. I love that. That's great. And then I mean, this has been. I really appreciate you kind of doing the deep dive on the menu stuff, and at the end of the day, the casual dining, to me, the casual dining value prop, especially as the lines start to blur, is leaning harder on experience, ambiance, and culinary. Like the food's got to be worth it. My
Hmm.
opinion again is like, as consumers, we will forgive a lot of sins if the food is good. We're like, the service wasn't quite there, the experience wasn't quite there. If the food is bad, no one's coming back. Like that's the necessary foundation that needs to exist. And
Hmm.
so, like, you can overlook certain things if you're like, yeah, sure, that was tough, but the food knocked it out of the park. And
Yeah.
if it's food that you are intentionally putting on the menu, that is executed well and that is designed to win that incremental visit, it just increases the chance that the guest will resonate and forgive maybe some of those other things, because it's not going to be perfect every single time. So
Yeah. And that is, we talked a little bit about value being like intertwined with price, and probably too much so.
yeah,
But that's the other thing too, is like the food can be great, but if it's like crazy expensive,
correct.
um,
Okay.
a really competitive price point, I think, can buy a lot of forgiveness.
Yeah,
If I go, I'll be honest, we were a Chili's family growing up. Like every birthday, from like ages 12 to maybe like 21, like, and I say every birthday, not just mine, my entire family's.
yeah.
We were going to a Chili's, and
That was us
there,
in Applebee's, so I get it.
yeah.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
yeah we over time graduated from Applebee's to Chili's. That's
yeah.
what we that's that's how we look at it internally at my family.
Shots fired at my immigrant upbringing. Thanks,
Wow.
Tyler. Jeez.
Hey, I love an Applebee's. My sister brings her kids there all the time.
Yeah,
They love a Shirley Temple at an Applebee's.
I get it. I'm with
And
you.
but their price points, a lot of their items are really competitively priced, and
Yeah,
they really do lean into that in some respects. And I think that it buys a little bit of forgiveness, because if my food takes 20 minutes, yeah, my bill is $15.
yep,
The service was on point. They kept my drinks full. Wasn't too loud. Wasn't too quiet. The food was good once it came out, but it took 20 minutes. Oh yeah, all right. They just had a bad day. Let me come back and go to the Chili's again. But if I'm like $22
yeah,
for that check, I'm a family of four, and I'm not getting out of there for less than $120. Now you don't really have as much wiggle room, and you really need to be just bang on with everything else, a part of the experience.
yeah, yeah. Totally, I'm with you. And like zooming out now here before, just for the folks who are still here, appreciate you sticking with us. And if you have any other questions, please drop them in the chat. My last question for you, Tyler, before we jump over to Q&A, is what does the future look like for walk-ons? What are the opportunities for growth, and what's on the roadmap?
Yeah. So I'd be remiss if I didn't tout our newly opened franchise location here at the Battery in Atlanta. That is our new prototype restaurant. It's beautiful. It's a work of art. Like, I think that will be an incredible generator of interest and growth in our franchise community. Because I think it's really hard for anyone that's interested in doing business with the walk-ons to walk into one of those restaurants and not be like, I want to buy 5 of these things.
Yeah,
So I think that's going to drive a lot of interest, because on top of it being beautiful, it's also a little bit more cost effective to build, and it kind of shrinks that runway to when you start getting that ROI across the business, which is awesome. Shout out to our development team for the work they did on that. They basically worked around the clock to get us there. Two, like, we want to grow with our existing franchisees, of course. We have some really fantastic operators that do really well. So there's some growth opportunity there. And then the last, we're opening a couple of corporate restaurants. And so we think that doing a couple ground up builds, that we have an opportunity to grow there as well. And then lastly is tapping into new marketing capabilities, and being able to have really compelling and elegant marketing campaigns and strategy, getting all the way down to the guest level.
yeah. Was the push for the new prototype, was that top down or bottoms up? And by that, what I mean was it a need from corporate to say, hey, we should cut down on the footprint size, or was there a need from franchisees, or yeah, how did
Both.
that come
Yeah,
about? Yeah, both.
it was definitely both. We've got really seasoned pros on our development team, and when they came in and kind of looked under the hood, and were like, boy, this thing costs a lot of money to make.
Yeah,
So they identified it right away. But yeah, some of our existing franchisees and prospects, they got to look at that price tag, and they were like, oof, it's really tough. 6,
yeah,
7 years ago, 2016, interest rates were what, 2%.
yep.
So if you're financing to be able to build a restaurant, you know, you can do that, and you can
Expensive.
do that
Yeah,
effectively. But now, 6, 7% interest,
yeah,
when our old prototype was so expensive to build,
it's
a
tough.
little bit tougher sell. And so
Yeah,
now we've made it a little more cost effective, and I think we found ourselves in a really good place.
awesome. Any parting words around the future of casual dining for the folks on the call or the folks watching this, and then we'll jump into some Q&A.
Yeah, I think that looking ahead for casual dining, that I think value and price is still going to be the two big drivers. I think that what we're going to see is that the brands that are very intentional with the guests that they're trying to attract and engage with, and have the discipline to um, you know develop and grow in a way that's true and authentic to the brand, are going to rise to the top, and the ones that are not as disciplined and are kind of unsure of who their core guest is are going to start to flounder over time. So you gotta know who you are and who your guest is, and go after them.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. Well, awesome. Jumping into the Q&A, we got one so far. Are there paper menus or QR codes in the restaurant? And if not, how are you collecting data inside the restaurant?
Hmm.
And I guess there's one question, which is CDP, but maybe I think this question is much more geared towards PII, email address, phone number, something like that potentially.
Yeah, so we have paper menus. We just launched a proof of concept for QR menus in our restaurants. Uh, that is something. QR menus are something that I kind of have a mixed opinion on, because I think that in certain respects it's from a bygone era. It reminds people of that kind of COVID area, where everyone was using a QR menu to display their menu. Um, but I do think there is opportunity with a QR code based menu to do some interesting things, of like what items we want to showcase. It allows you to be more nimble. It's more cost effective. Maybe I want to showcase this item and have it very, very much at the top of the menu. Um, but from a straight QR code menu, you're not going to get a ton from a guest data perspective. But that's where maybe you expand from beyond just a true QR code menu to one that also does order and pay at table. And then as part of the checkout process, maybe you embed your loyalty program, prompt them to sign in.
Yep.
Maybe you link to your Google page for a survey experience. And I'm really big on the order and pay side for QR, because versus a traditional like device on the table that you see like at some restaurants. Because one, I don't like having another 50 or 100 PCI in-scope PCI devices that I have to worry about.
Yeah.
And two, it's a little bit more cost effective to have a QR solution. But ultimately, they have the same outcome for me, which I'm trying to go after, which is when people are done, I want them to be able to leave on their terms, because there's nothing worse than you're a parent and you're done with your meal and your kid is throwing a fit and you cannot find your server and you
One of us
just
walks
want to get
out
the
with
hell
the
out of it.
kids.
Yeah,
That's what I do.
you have
I'm
to.
like, okay, you pay, and I'm walking outside with the kids. That's literally
Yeah.
what we did last week at a restaurant. Yeah.
Yeah, so I want the guests to be able to scan a QR code or go through a checkout process without the server having to come and drop a check and then come and pay the order.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's and then other ways of collecting data outside of a CDP. That's where like I guess Wi-Fi experience becomes so important. So if you have touched on managed network earlier in the call here, if you have a standardized managed network and standardized guest Wi-Fi, now you can have that splash page and you can collect some guest data from that, the email, the
Yeah.
phone number, and that gives you the ability to market. And then all the other strategies that we talked about are now possible.
Yeah, I feel like handhelds are increasingly important in casual dining. How do you feel about, like a Toast handheld as an example, as a way to not just get someone to pay easily, but maybe facilitate that? Hey, do you want an email address, or do you want an email address or phone number for a receipt as well?
So being like a career restaurant guy and an old school server, I'm still partial to the server book and pad and
Yeah.
pencil. Uh, but I do love a Toast Go. They've they've introduced a bunch of really compelling features with it too in the past few months. Specifically, like we can now kind of force we can now offer upsells on the device. So depending on what's rung up on the check, we can now recommend some certain products. We're prompting the team member like, hey, they've
To
got
ask.
they've got mozzarella logs and they've got waffle fries. Like let's offer them a McUltra or a Dos Equis or something like that. So like that's very cool. But it does also offer the opportunity to collect some guest data during the checkout process. So instead of me giving you the check and taking your card, I can lay the Toast Go down and they can go through that process. And maybe they give us their guest information, maybe they don't, but at least we
Yeah.
have the opportunity.
Yeah. Amazing. Um, Awesome. Well, I am not seeing any other questions here in the chat. So, Alan, appreciate you sharing that one. Tyler, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for spending some time with us, walking us through your background and what brought you to walk-ons and how you're basically future-proofing the brand. And especially in an
Trying.
increasingly, yeah, trying, especially in an increasingly, I think, competitive casual dining landscape. So, thank you so much. Appreciate the time. And for those of you who tuned in live or watching this on demand, again, thank you for your time and hope you learned something and got some value out of this. So appreciate you. Thanks, Tyler.
Appreciate it.
Take care.